Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. In today's video, we are going to talk about a real story which happened in Greek history. Now, everyone is familiar with the name Alexander, Alexander the Great, the man who had conquered the world. But very few knew about several instances of his life which captivated his own imagination and which left him perplexed and baffled. Today's short story is coming from this book called The Virtues of War by Stephen Presky, wherein he talks about the entire novel is based on the life of Alexander the Great. As many might already know, Alexander the Great had the mighty mission to conquer the world, and one fine day during his conquest, during the voyage of his conquest, towards the crossing of a river, he encounters a philosopher who seems so fearless that he looks Alexander in the eye. Now, Alexander firstly thinks that probably this guy doesn't know who I am. So, one of the army personnel of Alexander shouts out from the behind that he is Alexander, the man who has conquered the world. And the expression of the philosopher doesn't change even a bit. Now, Alexander is a bit taken aback that how come this man, even after the army men disclosed my identity, still seems to have that fearless, staunch face, and he dares to look me in the eye. Now, one thing we'll notice about these tendencies of truly spiritual and philosophical mindset people who are really insisting or sort of progressing towards their path of spirituality, they tend to become very fearless. They tend to access the true source of power. My today's video was to touch on this very important concept of the source of true power. If you want to understand from the Stoics, the Greek philosophers, what true power is, they basically give a very clear understanding, a clear narrative, which suggests that the person who has conquered himself has conquered the world. Now, this is something we have heard of, but how often do we practice it? We all are such slaves to the kind of inputs and the cravings and desires each of us have. The reason that Greek philosopher was superior to Alexander was his wants were lesser. The cravings he had towards Alexander or towards life in general were lesser as compared to Alexander. And he lost fear because of the fact that he was not attached to anything. Now, when we talk about this concept of detachment, suddenly there is a pessimistic overtone by the people who hear it for the very first time. Does that mean a person needs to be an ascetic? Does that mean a person needs to give up his dreams, ambitions, goals? To the contrary, you will realize that anyone who has achieved phenomenal success in life, which is everlasting, they have this very unique quality about themselves. This unique quality is that they really give their best, but when they understand that they are done with the job, they become absolutely detached. Now, some of us have a very rudimentary understanding of this word ascetic as sannyasi, right? In Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that a sannyasi is not someone who looks different from outside, but a sannyasi is a person who is in that state of equanimity, who is in that state of tranquility, and who is absolutely fearless, who is successful to the core. He has achieved success in his life. He has conquered the world because he has conquered himself. And also, a very beautiful quote by Marcus Aurelius, the mighty Roman emperor who was a philosopher by soul. He said so beautifully, and I would like to quote him in this context. He said, and I quote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Now, everyone has heard of this countless number of times, but the reason we still end up messed up or goofing up is because most of us don't invest in mastering our own self. We are always so focused and obsessed about the world around us and we want to fix the world. But what we fail to acknowledge is that the charity begins at home. You need to first conquer your own self even before someone tries to change the world. Mahatma Gandhi's famous quote, "Be the change you want to see," is a very startling reminder for all of those who think they can change the world and they are trying to change the world. Change begins within our own thought process, our own consciousness. Also, the fact that the true source of power, when we stop seeking it outside and turn inward, that will give us such an access of power which is not dependent on the circumstances and events of life, but it is coming from a very perennial or an ephemeral source. Now, ephemeral in English means something which is everlasting. An ephemeral source is something which is perennial or eternal. If you look at Sandeep Maheshwari, right, he is one of the most famous motivational speakers in India and probably around the world. He has more than 2 crore subscribers. And one of the people, and probably people who follow Sandeep Maheshwari might be knowing this, that he doesn't earn the monetization on his YouTube. If he earns the monetization, he might be earning in crores together every year. But he has made a part of his value system that what he's doing is not out of a need for money, but out of a need of contribution. His passion exists in this field. And he has told this many number of times that this thing which I am doing is not to seek validation, is not to seek approval of others as to how great this man is. Because as I always keep saying, the perception of people keep changing. They can lift you in one point of time and they can immerse you in a mud of all kind of loathing language and they can criticize you very venomously. And oftentimes, when we stop seeking validation and we start focusing inward and becoming a better version every second, then we get an access to true source of power. The results from the outside are necessary so that we can improve and calibrate our performance. The feedback is necessary, but most of us are not seeking feedback. Most of us are seeking appreciation and validation. Now that's a topsy-turvy ball game. That's a very slippery mud to navigate through. Also, the fact about Alexander the Great and this encounter with this Greek philosopher gives us the secret of true power. As I mentioned, true power comes when we are able to master ourselves. Whenever we are subjected by the chaos of our mind, how many times are we able to make our mind calmer? That is the sign of true strength. Now, some of us have a very crippled understanding that people who are spiritual or people who are sannyasis or ascetics, these are poor people. But let me tell you that the most wealthiest person in the planet is a sannyasi or an ascetic. And this is also a crippled understanding that you need to leave the material world and go in a place, a hilltop to meditate. As per Lord Krishna, if you look at Lord Krishna, he is also a sannyasi. But what we equate sannyasi to the conventional definition, someone who doesn't get married and probably he is completely devoid from the world. That is a very gross manifestation of this word. But there are subtler and more intricate elements to this word. Even a householder can become a sannyasi. Sannyasi doesn't mean that someone will completely leave his normal life and meditate 24/7. But true sannyas is a person who makes sure that every activity he engages in becomes an act of meditation. He's not bothered by the changing world around him because he understands this very deep point that the change is the only permanent thing. Life is impermanent. Just reflect on our own lives. There's nothing has been permanent. The happy moments have faded away. The sadness has faded away. The impermanence of life is what gives its nature. The nature of life is impermanent. Now, this fact, this point makes us grounded with reality. Because oftentimes, if something great happens in our life, it is natural to feel ecstatic. But some of us lose our state of mind and become too excited. When we become too excited, we need to remind ourselves that this too shall pass. And when we become too sad and remorse, we are grounded and shred completely occupied with feelings of melancholy, this is a thought process we can go back to. And the more we go back to this thought process, the more centered we become, the more at ease we are with life. Hope my today's video brought some sense and brought some clarity as to what it means to be truly powerful. And if you look at the world in general, right, the people who achieve the great levels of life. Now, again, this is again a subjective question. Some might consider greatness to be only of material success. I was listening to this fantastic, informational, and deeply inquisitive podcast by Gauranga Das and Ranveer Alabhadia in his channel Beer Biceps. And Gauranga Das told something which really hit the nail in my consciousness. He said that the way our life is designed, we achieve a lot of things in life. But the only thing which we take with us after death is our spiritual acumen, is our spiritual knowledge. Anything which you achieve in this life for sense gratification, this will only be there until you're alive. But what is after death? The equations beyond death is something where your spiritual acumen will benefit you. Now, this is again a completely tangential thought process, a viewpoint I'm going towards, but this is very important to realize, because oftentimes people think spirituality is something which only the monks do. But one thing, and a lot of change is happening. If you look at the youth in India today, a lot of people are going towards this phenomenal understanding. They're trying to dig deep towards the questions of life which remain unanswered. And when we understand, when we cultivate this inquisitiveness, there is a higher purpose in our life. A purpose which is just not about our own personal boundaries. We have a purpose which is aligned with the universal call. And once that is focused on, power is a natural offspring. You don't need to go and look at self-help literatures. You cannot cosmetically manufacture confidence, but confidence becomes your natural demeanor. Because now you have attacked the root of all fear and anxiety. Now, if you talk about the core of spirituality, it all begins with the identity. And if you think about it, all the thoughts which we have, all the programs and all the things which keep running in our mind, they all are rooted in our identity. My name is Purushottam, I am so and so. I am living in this house from so many years. I work in a certain MNC. And all the thoughts which I get in my mind are revolving around that identity, whether good or bad. But at the root of it, at the identity which we consider ourselves to be, is questioned. Because let's understand, spirituality is not dogmatic philosophy where you just accept the things as they are. It's all about experiencing the knowledge. It's all about exploration. And the more you explore and the more you unlearn the different layers of your identity, then you can clearly see what is within. The example of onion fits very well here. The way you peel the onion, and the more you peel it, the more you can go inside the different layers. Hence, it's very important to investigate our own state of mind, our own consciousness. Because the more we do that, the more we are unlearning the things which society and our childhood programming and conditioning has sold us. Hope my today's video was deeply insightful, and gave you pragmatic viewpoints about true source of power. So next time when you're looking for how to become more powerful, you don't have to travel far. You just need to look within. Thank you so much for your time on my video, and if you really like the content, don't forget to share it with a couple of your peers, because this content is something which anybody can benefit from. Thank you so much, and I'll meet you in the next video.